Testing up. There we go. And we are back. Welcome back, everyone. Me again, as you well could have predicted. I'm kind of predictable like that. With my last stream that I'm going to be doing before Campaign Evolve drops on the 23rd at 8 a.m. for me, as it were. Last time, we were just kind of going through the UNSC ships. We got up to the, past the Autumn class. We had finished Autumn class, and, going forward, we got the Valiant class. Valiant. That, just quickly go over this one. So the second most powerful UNSC ship by Meta Nerds Lore. I should probably subscribe to this guy. I haven't yet, but I probably should. Makes good videos. Alright, so let's get right into it.
What's up, Meta Nerds? This video is going to pull from every resource to completely understand the Valiant class.
I got my
this super heavy cruiser originates from the late 25th century as part of the UNSC effort to field a capital ship that could fill the gap between the existing cruisers and hypothetical upcoming battleships. It was actually drafted as a compromise between a proper battleship and heavy cruiser, retaining multi-mission flexibility while approaching true battleship scale tonnage. In practice, this meant that the Valiant sacrifices extreme armor and firepower of the type you'd find on a true battleship in exchange for versatility and command capabilities. After years of feasibility studies and redesigns, the lead ship, UNSC Valiant, was constructed at a Martian shipyard and commissioned in 2493. At the time, the Valiant's fusion drives were next-generation tech, and integrating them proved this point, with high costs and engineering delays nearly dooming this project from the start.
Wow.
And it was a lot larger. At 1,518 meters long and 373 meters wide, it dwarfed the earlier UNSC cruisers like the
I've noticed that the ships like the Halcyon, Marathon, and Autumn all seem to have a very similar profile, or at least silhouette. When you compare them side by side like this, they don't really look similar, but just from a perspective of, like, if you were to black out all the details, I have a feeling like these four ships would be very difficult to differentiate. At least somewhat. The Valiant is obviously a bit of a different case. But if you look at the Autumn, the Marathon, and the Halcyon, they have a very similar silhouette. So that's kind of interesting.
Marathon class at 1,192 meters. Like most UNSC ships, it was covered in reinforced titanium A armor plating, and its standard armament consisted of dual heavy magnetic accelerator cannons, or MACs. These are a pair of 50-centimeter MACs. It's essentially a bullet that is 20 inches wide. Backing up the MACs were the 50 M50A Archer missile pods, loaded with hundreds of guided missiles each, and a suite of point defense weapons to take out enemy fighters and boarding craft, coming in the form of M66 70mm autocannons, and dozens of M910 Rampart and M810 Helix point defense guns. Wow. Like we've seen in other ships, some also could carry the Shiva nuclear missiles, though this was rare.
So, anyone who doesn't... I know that I had, they've, covered what point defense weapons are, earlier. But for anyone who doesn't already know, what point defense weapons are, they are basically the smaller armaments on a ship, like a battleship or a destroyer, that are not meant, for dealing with the big targets. These, point defense guns, when it comes to larger targets like other ships, are not very useful at all. That's not their point. Their whole point is specifically to be useful against the smaller things like drone swarms and enemy fighters, and to intercept things like incoming missiles. That's what point defense is for. Just I'd break that down now.
Together, it is definitely one of the most powerful warships humanity had ever built at this time. but its design emphasis was on command and control, or C2. The class had the internal volume to support specialized flag bridges and fleet command centers, intended to be staffed by admirals and its crew of over 1,000. There were even some Valiants outfitted with gigantic flag bridge facilities with 24 stations and floor-to-ceiling displays, allowing an admiral and their staff to coordinate entire battle groups from the cruiser. And so that's what I meant before about it not being just a brute force combatant, not designed only for slugging it out with ships, technically more specialized as a fleet command ship, a mobile nerve center for UNSC naval operations. And when we get to its history, you'll see how there were so many resource constraints in the wars that followed, that not every ship received the full suite of command upgrades, and plans to upgrade all the Valiants had been abandoned.
So something that I've noticed so far is every single command deck on every Halo ship that we've seen so far, all the command decks are exposed. And that's a big problem because in a ship like this one, glass breaks suddenly or venting atmosphere in the bridge that, not good. I know that they have like shutters, like metal shutters that snap shut to stop it from venting atmosphere, but it's still an exposed target. This is the brain of your ship, basically. It doesn't actually need to have a you don't need to place your command deck, your bridge, on the exterior of a ship. That's actually quite suboptimal because now it's exposed. Enemy fighters can hit it. You don't even need to have visibility from there in the way of like panoramic windows, simply because something like cameras around the ship can still give the visual display that might be beneficial from the bridge to see what's going on without actually having the bridge itself exposed to enemy fire. You have a lot of armor between the fight and the bridge, basically. That's the basic logic behind it.
But still, even the baseline design had the tonnage, the firepower, and the sensor capacity to serve as a flagship augmenting any battle group of smaller warships. Though its development as a whole was almost cut short. Less than 2 years after its commissioning, these expensive cruisers were stricken from the Navy's rolls and slated for partial scrapping due to their cost overruns and the fleet's shifting priorities. Basically, it was peacetime. At the time of the mid-2490s, only a few Valiants existed, and it seemed that this class would end as a footnote in UNSC naval history. An interesting technical achievement, but kind of too much and impractical. But as is often the case for the military-industrialized complex, they were eventually saved by a new war. In 2497, the UNSC uncovered that insurrectionist sympathizers had infiltrated the colonial military authority, leading to the dissolution of the CMA and a massive UNSC expansion to fight the insurrection. Suddenly, the Navy needed every high-end ship it could get. The Valiant-class cruisers, rather than being scrapped, were recommissioned and retrofitted as command ships, finally being fully built out to the specs the designers intended. Now there was a true need for command and control flagships, as like any insurrectionist war, it was very complex and diffused, with tons of different fleets spread all across the galaxy. The Valiant's heavy firepower and large sensor and communication suites would prove invaluable in leading task forces on long patrols and dangerous expeditions into deep insurrectionist territory. So now that they're restored to active duty, these super heavy cruisers would take key roles in the Epsilon Iridani fleet and other battle groups, and with their greater firepower and command and control facilities, they were augmenting battle groups of smaller warships. Almost without exception, the Covenant's capital ships were larger, faster, and equipped with energy shielding and plasma weapons, basically outclassing UNSC craft in every metric. The Kent battle cruiser, or what we call the CCS class, was about 1,782 meters long, and its energy shield system could absorb most attacks and deliver more deadly attacks. Even though a lot of these UNSC ships had around 6 feet of titanium A armor, plasma weapons were said to boil it off. So it's really just acting like a sacrificial layer. These areas aren't getting hit multiple times. Once the plasma weaponry makes contact, that section of armor is gone in a few seconds. And with the Valiant, we don't get what's described as the 1-2 punch with the Marathon. Those two coordinated shots that would impact just a split second apart from each other, having damage output that was more than the sum of its parts. Cracking a shield quicker than just being hit by two different guns. And the Autumn class has what I described as essentially a 3-round burst MAC cannon. Pretty simple but effective. So since it did not have these unique features, the tactic was pretty straightforward. You just keep bombarding it with MAC shots until their shielding is knocked offline. And then if you could do this, the MACs could start ripping the vessel to pieces. UNSC tactical analysis during the war states that it took roughly 3 UNSC ships to beat 1 Covenant ship of a similar class. So it's 3-1, but there are also way more Covenant ships. Just to really stress how much of an uphill battle this was for humanity.
Jeez.
Besides this, you could also hope to kind of guide or lure Covenant fleets towards the orbital defense platforms with their super MACs, with commanders finding any little tactic they could to try and give them some advantage over the Covenant technology. And of course, the CCS were not even the largest Covenant ships. The CAS class were 3 kilometers long, and the CSO were more than 20 kilometers long.
Oh.
3 kilometers long, and the CSO were more than 20 kilometers.
Wow. Wait, isn't the CSO, isn't that the thing that we use a slip space drive to blow up and reach? Or I guess not blow it up, we sent half of it to oblivion. Isn't that how that one went? And basically 2,900 meters, that's basically 29 kilometers long. That is actually outpacing the size of many Imperium ships in 40k. If I'm not mistaken, there's only one class of ship that even comes close, and that's the Gloriana class. And those had variable size. Some might have been larger than a CSO, but I think most were actually shorter than a CSO.
Kilometers long. And we see the most famous Navy commanders of this era coming to rely on the Valiant's capabilities, like Vice Admiral Preston Cole, the UNSC's most celebrated fleet commander, made the UNSC Everest his personal flagship in 25-26. A veteran of early cruiser classes, Cole instantly recognized the Everest potential, and so it was aboard a Valiant-class cruiser that the Cole Protocol was first conceived. This protocol was designed to prevent Covenant forces from finding Earth, as well as any other inner colony worlds. The actual protocol reads, "To safeguard the inner colonies and Earth, all UNSC vessels or stations must not be captured with intact navigation databases that may lead Covenant forces to human civilian population centers. If any Covenant forces are detected, 1. Activate selective purge of databases on all ship-based and planetary data networks. 2. Initiate triple screen check to ensure all data has been erased and all backups neutralized. 3. Execute viral data scavengers. 4. If retreating from Covenant forces, all ships must enter slipstream space with randomized vectors not directed toward Earth, the inner colonies, or any other human population center. 5. In case of imminent capture by Covenant forces, all UNSC ships must self-destruct. Violation of this directive will be considered an act of treason, and pursuant to UNSC Military Law Archives, JAG 845P and JAG 7576L, such violations are punishable by life imprisonment or execution. And it was thanks to this protocol that even after 27 years of war with the Covenant, no human vessels could be blamed for giving up Earth's location. The Covenant only found Earth because of the Forerunner artifacts that were here, which were recorded by the Luminary. So they found us using Forerunner tech, not from anybody failing to adhere to the Cole Protocol. We also know that his flagship, the UNSC Everest, was organized into 51 distinct decks, 20 primary levels, 30 subdecks, and a central hangar deck divided into 2 halves. Deck numbering was arranged around this hangar deck, which served as the reference point and was designated Level 0. Most sections of the ship could be accessed through standard elevator touchpad controls, though the upper command levels, levels 13 through 20, were restricted areas that required biometric fingerprint authentication for entry. And level 19 was the flag deck, where Admiral Cole directed fleet-wide operations. And there were also AI personalities which could be holographically projected of several historic naval commanders, including Marcus Agrippa, Oliver Hazard Perry, and Isoroku Yamato, showing that he wanted to have this council of other great commanders to speak with. And we get some more details about how he modified his ship from what would become his last stand, the Battle of Cy Serpentis. He is said to have ordered enormous amounts of titanium A armor plating to reinforce the Everest, so more plating on the existing plates, and he brought the damaged vessel UNSC Io, which had been heavily damaged during the Battle of 18 Scorpii.
They just showed?
While also Cole was secretly researching theoretical studies on stellar density and slipspace navigation. His direct superiors in the wider UNSC were unaware of this. In preparing for this battle, the Everest alone was stockpiled with 105 Shiva-class nuclear missiles, 2,400 Archer missiles, and 45,000 ammunition blocks for the ship's M810 point defense network. Meanwhile, the Prowler UNSC wink of an eye spent a full week covertly observing Covenant activity in the Cy Serpentis system. And Cole even reached out to his former lover turned insurrectionist, Lorraine Castilla, hoping to have the help of some insurrectionists. And he sets things into motion with Battle Group India emerging into the Cy Serpentis system in a single coordinated slipspace transition. The sudden arrival of dozens of human warships generated a massive radiation wave that rippled outward through the system, briefly washing over the 3 nearest planets. This unmistakable signal immediately alerted the Covenant fleet, and they rapidly moved to intercept. But rather than engage directly, this battle group executed a maneuver that had not yet been seen before, an in-system slipspace jump. Using a network of slipspace guidance beacons that were secretly deployed earlier by the Prowler UNSC wink of an eye, Cole ordered his fleet to jump toward the gas giant Viperidae. Though this was a genius idea, it's still the first time it was implemented, and so not all ships arrived at the exact same spot at the exact right time, and so these stragglers were quickly hunted down and destroyed by Covenant vessels. But it did serve a purpose. While the Covenant ships pursued, the main body of Cole's fleet was able to regroup near the gas giant. And as the Covenant fleet descended on them, Cole divided Battle Group India into 2 formations. The starboard element curved around Viperidae, positioning itself to strike the pursuing Covenant ships from an unexpected angle, and forced the Covenant fleet into a divided formation, allowing the majority of the UNSC battle group to bring their MAC cannons and missile batteries to bear on separate portions of the enemy line. It's said that 100 Covenant ships were heavily damaged, 23 were destroyed, but Cole would lose nearly 1/3 of his ships. As the Covenant regrouped, insurrectionist vessels led by the modified warship Bellicose arrive. They suffer heavy losses, losing nearly 1/4 of their fleet, and this bought the UNSC fleet enough time to regroup and actually provide cover for many of the fleets to retreat. But Admiral Cole and the Everest stayed behind. He would send direct broadcasts to the Covenant fleet, mocking them in their divine righteousness, and their commander decided to devote the rest of their vessels to destroying the Everest. The incoming plasma fire was partially deflected by the powerful magnetospheres surrounding the gas giant, and Cole would push the Everest closer and closer, to the point where escape from the planet's gravitational pull would become impossible. At that moment, he unleashed a massive missile barrage on the lead Covenant vessel, with nuclear detonations obliterating the target ship, but the rest of the fleet was fine. But this was just a distraction. This whole setup was so that he could fire 100 Shiva-class nuclear warheads directly into Viperidae's unstable core. This triggered a runaway chain reaction that ignited the planet's interior. Viperidae underwent a brief but violent phase of stellar fusion, effectively transforming the gas giant into a temporary brown dwarf. The Everest is presumed destroyed, along with 300 Covenant warships representing 2 full fleets. But there are some theories that this wasn't the end. Records show that just before the planet ignited, there were a cluster of Archer missiles detonated prematurely in front of the Everest, the flash producing a distortion that resembles the visual signature of a slipspace rupture. And when you combine that with Cole's earlier research, studying slip space mathematics and stellar density, we know how the stellar density point played into this, and he had already pulled off an in-system slip space jump, but he was also researching an in-atmosphere slip space jump, something that had always been considered impossible. To further add to this mystery, the visual record of the Everest, captured by the retreating UNSC ships, showed the silhouette of a second vessel nearby, believed to be the damaged cruiser UNSC Io. Moments later, another burst of light occurred. When the Nova engulfed the area, only one ship remained visible before being consumed by the explosion. Because of all this, Admiral Cole's ultimate fate became a matter of intense speculation, with artificial intelligences operating under the UNSC command network codenamed Surgeon, later calculated that there was a 98.7% probability that Cole had successfully escaped using an experimental in-atmosphere slip space jump. But of course, whether he successfully pulled this off remains unknown. The lead ship, UNSC Valiant, was attached to the Epsilon...
Sorry, I just had a drink and it went down the wrong pipe. But if he survived, if Preston Cole survived, Admiral Cole, if he survived, why wouldn't he have returned to the UNSC? Or was it just
Radani
not
fleet
really
defending
possible?
Reach, where it said that its MAC gun salvos were nearly on par with a stationary orbital defense platform, and it would be the flagship during the Fall of Reach campaign. While Reach did fall to overwhelming Covenant force, the Valiant was presumably lost or rendered combat ineffective in the process. Many irreplaceable cruisers and carriers were destroyed at Reach. These super heavy cruisers were rare to begin with, really, and going from insurrection to alien war just meant that they were losing more of these than they could produce. In the years after the war, the surviving cruisers continued to prove their worth, even as the UNSC introduced new designs like the Autumn class, which incorporated Covenant tech, this reactive armor that really would be a jump forward, and of course the Infinity class supercarrier. But even with these, the venerable Valiants were not retired. You even have the UNSC Victory of Samothrace, which underwent 300 improvements to bring the class up to post-war standards. It is the Samothrace that was outfitted with a next-generation Sarisa MAC weapon system. It is the most powerful ship-mounted MAC cannon ever built, described as a point-to-point ship killer. This weapon is so large and energy-intensive that aside from the UNSC Infinity itself, only a Valiant-class hull was said to have the capacity to carry it. By 2559, under Captain Abigail Cole, the daughter of Preston Cole, the Victory of Samothrace led Battle Group Omega against the Banished and other post-Covenant threats, meaning that a Valiant class was being used decades after its creation. The ship did sustain heavy damage and crash during the Battle of Boundary, but plans were made to salvage and repair it, though that does bring us to the end of its official history. You see that the Valiant class was key to humans inheriting the mantle, becoming the dominant force in our galaxy, and would forever be seen as a symbol of human ingenuity and resilience, going from a troubled creation process and near cancellation to its rebirth as a command ship trying to maintain order during the insurrection era, and being just in time to take on the Covenant, providing humanity with some crucial tactical but also emotionally important victories. That's it for its breakdown. If you made it this far, please hit that like button. I really do need your help. But most important of all...
Thank you, Meta Nerds. Alrighty, so... that was the Valiant class Super Heavy Cruiser. Which is a cruiser being super heavy is a little bit weird. But... whatever. Let's move on then.
What's up?
Valiant. No. This is the Halberd class. I think I've seen this before. Not the lore of it before, but this ship silhouette is familiar to me. But How light destroyer wolf packs hunted Covenant ships, the Halberd class. Light destroyer, I'm guessing. By Meta Nerds Lore. It'll be weird if they call this a cruiser, though.
What's up, Meta Nerds? This is going to be a complete breakdown of the Halberd class light destroyer, which emerges in the late Insurrection era as a new class of UNSC warship, entering service by 2508, with the Insurrection going from 2494 to 2526. It was manufactured by Sino-Viet Heavy Machinery, and designed to pack heavy firepower into a relatively compact hull, featuring this distinctive arrowhead-shaped profile and a reinforced hull with around 2 meters of titanium A armor plating that's about 6 feet thick. And replacement armor plates can be quickly cut to shape and patched onto a ship at a naval depot. Though, of course, any more serious repairs, anything to the destroyer's underlying structure, would require the specialized care of a shipwright. And there are some really unique features, like part of the structure includes vanadium steel components.
It looked like it had 2 Mac guns at the front.
And built-in thermal radiators to bleed off heat. And we even see later into the Human Covenant War that they were outfitted with an epsilon pattern layout, which gave it a really increased field of view. At a length of 485 meters, or 1,591 feet, it was only a few meters longer than the Stalwart class light frigate, which comes in at 478 meters. Yet it has a mass of around 1.8 million metric tons, which is roughly double the frigate's mass, due to its thicker, higher quality armor.
Wow.
It's this sturdy construction that allows...
So I see that, yeah, these smaller frigates really were much lighter.
The Halberd to absorb tremendous punishment relative to its size, though its armor is still lighter than that of the larger UNSC capital ships, which is in line with its classification as a light destroyer. The trade-off is a fast, small crew warship, purpose-built for combat, with less multi-role utility than bigger vessels, but with excellent offensive capability. And like we see with a lot of UNSC ships, the Halberd's design is modular. Subsystems can be swapped or omitted, so that it's custom-tailored for a mission, and this helps to streamline production. When there were shortages of resources during the war, we often see Halberds constructed as stripped-down escort specialists, omitting all non-essentials to save on time and have a reduced need for crew. Its propulsion and structure also emphasize its speed and durability, powered by 4 primary and 4 secondary high-thrust fusion drives, giving it excellent sublight acceleration and maneuverability for its class. While like with all human ships, the Shaw Fujikawa Translate engine provides faster-than-light travel via slipspace, and the aft section is protected by armored screens to shield the reactor and slipspace drive, which we actually get a good look at here. This isn't just a slipspace drive, this is the one used on the Halberd. And what's really great is that all of this can be built relatively fast. Only about 4 months from keel laying to launch, as seen with UNSC Iroquois' construction in late 2551 and launch by April of 2552. This construction could have been done at any of the 3 Sino-Viet construction yards, with one on Earth, Reach, and Andesia. And crewing is also efficient, with 250 sailors, and an optional 50 Marines as an onboard security force or landing contingent.
I had no idea.
And the quarters for all these people were Spartan and cramped, emphasizing function over comfort. So you really see that every detail about this thing is stressing that the Halberd was engineered to put as much armor and armament as possible into a compact, fast ship that could be produced as quick as possible, which was necessary when you were just fighting off fellow humans across the colonies, but even more crucial when facing the Covenant's overwhelming numbers. Though lighter than a cruiser, the Halberd class carries an impressive arsenal for its size, which is in line with the UNSC's doctrine of packing a heavy punch into their destroyers. Its primary weapon is the Spinal Magnetic Accelerator Cannon, specifically the 14 B11 R2 MAC, consisting of twin-linked, high-velocity coil guns built into the length of the ship. The joke is that UNSC ships are basically a brick with a gun in it, more specifically like a bullpup rifle, using as much barrel length as possible. The Halberd's dual MAC battery can fire hyper-dense kinetic slugs, capable of smashing through Covenant warships' hulls, and even launching specialized guided rounds or drone missiles. Because with these twin barrels, there's one larger and one slightly smaller, allowing it to do this 1-2 punch or alternate fire, But there's a bit of a catch here, because the larger gun is used for firing all standard munition packages, while only the smaller one is used for firing kinetic rounds, which you think of with a MAC gun. So although it's saying dual fire 1-2 punch, it's not as powerful as the Marathon's true dual fire MAC guns. With the Marathon, they're both larger. The 49 F9A1 heavy coil, true capital ship quality MAC guns that can fire specifically so that one round hits just a split second behind the other, creating this cumulative effect that is more powerful than the sum of its parts. It's more penetrative than just having two different ships fire a MAC at kind of the same time. But at least with the halberd, maybe we're seeing what inspired what we get with the Marathon. Maybe commanders wish these two barrels were just as big as possible and just firing MAC shots back to back. While feeding the MAC is an advanced capacitor system that can be quickly swapped out if damaged, ensuring even if this destroyer takes heavy damage, it's trying to fire as long as possible. And then supporting the MAC weaponry, we have 26 oversized M58 Archer missile pods, all lining its flanks. And these pods house 800 individual guided missiles, which gives it the ability to rip open ships or take out numerous ground targets at once. It can also be equipped with up to 3 Shiva-class nuclear missiles, though like always this is rare. Though it is funny that with these nukes, they brag that if a Covenant capital ship's shields are down, just one of these can take out a capital ship. But of course, that's easier said than done. Proof of that is that they are not saying that a single nuke takes down shields, just so you appreciate how difficult it was to take out Covenant capital ships. And then for defense against starfighters and boarding parties, we have 4 twin-linked M870 Rampart point defense guns, which are autocannons and of course can take out fighters and boarding craft, but also plasma projectiles, as these do tend to move a bit slower. In UNSC service, the halberd did get a reputation as being one of the most heavily armed classes of UNSC vessels. A coordinated group of halberds could easily damage even the largest Covenant ships, of course through very accurate concentrated fire. Though the halberd's focus on firepower comes at the expense of carrying capacity and some endurance. It has a single small hangar bay, originally considered state-of-the-art with its gravity-assisted landing system, which can decelerate small incoming craft, but this could also be reconfigured to fit an electromagnetic catapult launch assist, which can quickly deploy shuttlecraft. And this hangar can typically accommodate only a couple of Pelican dropships, and halberds do not carry dedicated fighter wings in their default configuration. Commander Jacob Key's Iroquois deployed without any shipborne strike craft, at least by default. In specialized missions though, the class's modular nature allowed some trade-offs, so during deep strike, what are called Wolfpack operations, some halberds offloaded their marine complements to make room for 2 squadrons of F-29 Nandao space fighters, really increasing the reconnaissance and interceptor capability while still being able to act independently. But you see, it is definitely intended to use its firepower and speed, and they are kind of forcing it to work as a carrier, but at least you do technically have that option.
It kind of looks more like
as a destroyer, it's intended to escort larger capital ships and operate in packs to hunt down enemy vessels. And in this role, it would become one of the UNSC's most important ships, one of its most deadly destroyers in the bloodiest years of the war. By the time of first contact with the Covenant in 2525, dozens of halberds had already seen action in our previous human versus human conflict. But they were pressed into both their conventional roles, but also a ton of improvised roles. In the initial years, UNSC strategists experimented with using these light destroyers as raiders. Entire squadrons of halberds were formed into roving Wolfpack task forces, assigned to harass and delay more powerful Covenant fleets. Like in 2526, when several halberds from Battle Group X-Ray were combined into Task Force Pantea, a 4-destroyer axe formation meant to strike behind enemy lines, hunting down Covenant capital ships in contested systems, and using their speed and coordinated attacks to compensate for being outgunned. These tactics had mixed results. These Wolfpacks could deliver surprise MAC volleys and missile salvos powerful enough to take out Covenant ships, but their losses were high. Their life expectancy was measured in mere weeks. And at Netherop in 2526, Task Force Pantea ambushed a Covenant fleet where at least one halberd was lost in battle. And throughout the war, many UNSC officers were skeptical of the destroyers and fleet actions, seeing them as too fragile and underpowered against the sheer volume of Covenant weaponry. The UNSC brass ran the numbers, and it seemed that the consensus was that it took 7 UNSC destroyers to fight on par with just 4 Covenant frigates. Again, that's just frigates. A true testament to the Covenant's technological advantages. But as is often the case with humans, we just had to be more clever, always coming up with new ways to use these. With the most famous example occurring during July 2552 at Sigma Octantis IV, when Commander Jacob Keyes, aboard the Halberd-class UNSC Iroquois, lured 4 Covenant ships into a trap and executed the legendary Keyes Loop maneuver. By outsmarting the enemy, the Iroquois managed to destroy 3 Covenant warships in quick succession, and even heavily damage a 4th, by using precise MAC strikes and nuclear mines. Even if the Iroquois was itself badly damaged, this was both shocking for the Covenant and an enormous morale boost for humanity. As the war dragged on and the Covenant pressed humanity to the brink, these destroyers were increasingly thrown into frontline fleet actions, where we see their versatility really being put to use. Seeing them as escorts and picket ships, screening the flanks of bigger cruisers and carriers, and during the fall of Reach in August 2552, several dozen Halberd-class destroyers
I know that modded Halo Reach footage where it was like capital ship battles there. I think that was with Master MCC. I think I could probably find that on Workshop, but I am aware that that's a little inaccurate, simply in the way of UNSC ships were never shielded until the autumn in the Infinity, and even then that isn't the same as Covenant shields or the shields that like the Spartans had on them with the Mjolnir Mjolnir Mark V.
As part of the Epsilon Eridani defense fleet. Many were lost holding off Covenant attackers, but their presence added much needed MAC firepower, and by this point in the war, almost all halberds had been refit into pure combat roles. Non-essential systems were stripped, with minimal crews on board, all trying to maximize the sheer number of hulls that the UNSC could field. And in the back of their minds, all commanders knew what happened 3 years earlier, in 2549 with the Heart of Midlothian, which managed to destroy 5 Covenant ships at once by triggering its self-destruct sequence. And those few halberds that survived to see the war's end did continue to serve after the war, with records showing that halberd destroyers were on home fleet duty at Earth in 2557, and others were escorting colony freighters by 2558, as the UNSC was recovering and rebuilding. And so we see that the halberd has thoroughly earned its respect, fighting in the insurrectionist era and the Covenant War, and consistently being a swift and deadly, even at times giant killer, punching far above its weight. That's it for its breakdown. If you made it this far, please just hit that like button. It really is the best way to help me out, and I could really use the help. But most important...
Thank you, Meta Nerds. I quite liked that one. So that was the Halberd class light destroyer of the UNSC, and now we're moving on again.
What's up, Meta Nerds?
Alright, still by Meta Nerds lore, the Phoenix class colony ship. I specifically recognize the Spirit of Fire as this one. In the in Halo Wars and Halo Wars 2, this is the ship that the Spirit of Fire was a class. It's the class of ship that the Spirit of Fire was, and it was first and foremost a colony ship. It says it right here, but the Spirit of Fire, to my knowledge, was retrofitted to be specifically a more like military command ship. More like a carrier than a colony ship. This diagram looks like it's from Halo Wars 2. It is Halo Wars 2. Because it's mentioning Isabel here.
What's up, Meta Nerds? We're going to pull from every resource available to completely understand the Phoenix-class colony ship, officially known as the Phoenix-class Colonial Support Vessel with the hull classification CFV. It was developed during humanity's 24th century, the golden age of space expansion. First commissioned around 2362, it emerged as the primary vessel for establishing new extrasolar colonies. Built by Halifax Spaceworks, it was designed to carry entire colonial expeditions from an inner colony like Earth out to distant worlds throughout the Milky Way galaxy, meaning it would ferry thousands of colonists alongside all the equipment and prefabricated infrastructure needed to settle an entire planet.
Wow.
And for many decades after its introduction, the Phoenix remained the largest interstellar vessel ever built by humanity.
Hang on. I'm backing it up a bit. I got distracted by the pretty visuals.
It was designed to carry entire colonial expeditions from an inner colony like Earth out to distant worlds throughout the Milky Way galaxy, meaning it would ferry thousands of colonists alongside all the equipment and prefabricated infrastructure needed to settle an entire planet. And for many decades after its introduction,
I quite like these visual breakdowns of the ships. I am planning on going over Star Wars ships at some point, because I know some things about some ships, but the exact breakdowns like we see here are still very impressive to me, and I just like seeing them. It looks like we don't really see this in Halo Wars. I noticed that the actual top section of the ship here looks a lot different than it does in the actual game when we're playing on the levels where we're on top of the Spirit of Fire. This section of the ship looks very different than it does in gameplay. So that's kind of interesting.
The Phoenix remained the largest interstellar vessel ever built by humanity, and it's said that just a single Phoenix could establish a self-sufficient colony in as little as 6 months.
Wow!
But often multiple Phoenix vessels would travel together to seed a new world, like with the case of Arcadia, which was colonized by a fleet of 3 Phoenix-class ships. And it's important to understand that they were not just passenger liners, they were colonial arc ships carrying entire civilizations on board. Prefabricated colony starter units, hydroponics modules, and all the countless mundane things you need to start a colony. Up to the very technologically impressive things like terraforming, changing the atmosphere and extracting water, all in an effort to make alien worlds habitable. The very first step often included just deploying pre-assembled outpost structures, basically dropping a portable city down onto the planet's surface right upon arrival.
So I guess that explains the fire bases that we got in Halo Wars. So I'm guessing this is just like a militarized version of the prefabricated colony units. But so essentially it sounds like these were originally supposed to be civilian structures. So that's kind of cool.
Could collect and process raw materials on world to build new materials and expand the colony even more as people moved from the Phoenix down to these newly built structures. And it's this simple but effective system that allowed the Colonial Administration Authority to expand across dozens of worlds. Almost all inner and outer colonies owe their successful founding to this class of ship. And its very name, Phoenix, was symbolic of how it gave birth to new life, because after completing its mission, these Phoenixes would be decommissioned and sort of cannibalized on site, stripped apart and put into the colony, down to things like fusion reactors being removed and installed as the new colony's power plant. The ship became part of these cities. Even the ship's onboard AI would sometimes transition to serve as the colony's local intelligence, like with CAA's Skid Blodnir's AI, Loki, becoming the planetary security intelligence for Harvest, after the ship's reactor and data systems were used to jumpstart that colony. So the Phoenix-class vessel rose again as the colony itself. Now, taking a closer look at its construction and interior, it is one of humanity's first true Starliner-grade colony ships, and this entire massive mobile city was forged in titanium A armor. less
like
of, but the same type of military-grade material used on later UNSC warships. This wasn't because they expected to take incoming fire, that was a few decades off, but just because it was better at handling the stresses of slip space travel and the pressures of atmospheric entry. Like all human ships, it was powered by the Shaw Fujikawa Translate engine, the breakthrough tech that enabled faster-than-light jumps. These were 2,500 meters long, 80 meters wide, and 690 meters tall.
It's actually a pretty cool visual of it. I didn't realize there were these gaps down here. I wonder what that's, why they did it like this.
That's 1.5 miles long, more than twice the length of the later Halcyon, though less than half of the much later enormous Infinity class, while weighing around 44 million metric tons when fully loaded, which is 4 times the Halcyon, though less than half the Ket pattern or CCS. And there are around 12,000 people on board. This includes
and less than a 20th of the Infinity
ship's operating crew and the thousands of colonists, engineers, and support staff, basically an entire small town's population on one trip. Now visually, it is described as just being a broad, bulky hole, but that's because it's meant to maximize internal volume.
So this is actually my favorite ship in Halo. The Phoenix class colony ship, my beloved. It is my favorite ship in Halo. I never knew much about it. I only remember going through Halo Wars, seeing this ship for the first time and thinking that it looked awesome. And then, not long after, I had ended up playing through Halo 4 for the first time. This was little kid me. I don't remember what grade I was in, but I wasn't even in high school yet when Halo 4 came out. I think I was still in middle school. But I play through Halo 4, I see the Infinity, and my first thought is, hey, that thing looks a lot like, that ship looks a lot like the Spirit of Fire. And I had no concept of that yet. I didn't actually realize the scale of ships in Halo until more recently. So, yeah, that's kind of cool.
Centrally raised superstructure, believed to be the habitation dome. Vast sections of the ship were devoted solely to cargo, but also...
Alright, so let me read through this real quick. Combat bridge. Serena's upgrades to the fire control matrix and trunk lines provide 50% additional bandwidth. Nice. Thanks, Serena. Mac array. It looks like it has 3 Macs just strapped together there. Techs say the usability and safety improvements Serena and Isabel have made are substantial, but that's not my area of expertise for factory modules. If we had a complete manufacturing template, which we don't, sorry. All backlog maintenance of our Pelicans and Darters has been completed. I have moved some of the spare dropships out.
Tons of specialized machinery, while other decks were for living space and various amenities, but some of the largest sections were for prefabricated infrastructure and supplies. Terraforming gear, things like atmosphere generators to begin shaping.
All 10 of our D20 Herons will be ready for deployment once their reaction as tanks. Okay, so this is something that I'm a little interested on. So during the when the Spirit of Fire slammed into that Covenant frigate in Halo Wars 1, they'd like sheared this entire segment of the ship. And I know that we see the in the ending of Halo Wars, the ending cinematic, that this segment is under repair, but was the Spirit of Fire able to just make new D20 Herons? Because these things, they look like they got blown up. Like they got fucking shredded when they did that maneuver. So did these things, was the Spirit of Fire able to just like build new ones of them? I mean, that's the obvious answer, I guess, simply by virtue of the fact that they have them in Halo Wars 2, and this segment is fully repaired in Halo Wars 2 at the beginning of it. But I digress.
A breathable environment, power plants and fusion reactors, modular habitat units, basically prefab houses, but everything from farming equipment down to small schools and, of course, toilets. I like to think thousands of toilets. And like I said, you take everything out of the Phoenix, move into that new city, and then get to work breaking down the Phoenix itself and reintegrating it to this super city. And although it sounds like a lot to have 12,000 people, a lot of them were highly specialized. Your average person wouldn't really volunteer for this and might not have the skill set to kick off a colony. And these people would have to go into cryogenic freezing. With dozens of cryo bays, we have some sources with refitted ships having 42 cryo bays, but that's 42 bays to fit the 12,000 people. Just about everyone would have to be in stasis for the majority of the multi-year slip space journeys, with only a minimal skeleton crew remaining awake to monitor the voyage while everyone else slept through transit. It's unclear if they rotated off, maybe work for 6 months and then go into cryo for a bunch of years, but it seems to be possible that this was just these people's job. One would spend their whole life crewing these types of ships, years on the open seas of slip space. It must have been a very strange job to just wake up thousands of people years later. From their point of view, it was like they just woke up from some deep sleep. And there are some large hangar decks for numerous shuttles, cargo dropships, and personal transports to ferry colonists and equipment down to the planet's surface. When these are later used in a military capacity, we know that the Phoenix could deploy D-82 darter dropships and D-20 Heron heavy lifters, but it was probably ships like these that were originally meant to offload colony vehicles and prefab structures. And so it's a bit of a mix of cargo freighter, cruise ship, and mobile command center for building a new world, with everything from hydroponics gardens to foundries to take raw metals and turn them into tools. But of course, though conceived as military colony ships, they would be pressed into service during times of war. By the late 25th century, faced with colonial unrest and later the alien Covenant threat, almost all of the Phoenix-class ships are reborn in this military role, with the most famous example being the UNSC Spirit of Fire.
Yeah.
Originally built in 2473, it was later requisitioned and retrofitted into a war support ship, first during the insurrection, but it stayed on to fight into the Human Covenant War. And of course, those cargo bays are now filled with military vehicles, and they're adding armaments. The Spirit of Fire had 3 MACs, 10 naval coil gun batteries, 24 Archer missile pods, and 40 Rampart point defense guns. Basically on par with some of the purpose-made capsules.
So, something that somewhat confuses me. Did the UNSC have, like, some degree of, like... Because those hangars, it looks like they've got, like, the Star Wars thing where it's, like, that shield that keeps atmosphere in the sword in. I don't know if... Like... Does the UNSC have that so they don't have to vent the hangars every time they're launching a ship out? Or does it, like, the ship is brought out to the hangar and it's crewed, and then they vent the and then all the personnel that are in the hangar are just like, they get out of the hangar and the air is sucked out as before the hangar doors open? Or like, I'm wondering that, because like, how we know they didn't have shield techs, not like the Covenants. But did they have, like, I don't know.
Ships. And we're going from deploying colonies to now deploying forward operating bases, making sure territories were thoroughly secured, not just on a map, but actually having a ground presence there, deploying entire bases and loads of vehicles from Warthogs to Scorpions, while the Phoenix-class ships themselves could stay in orbit, orchestrating orbital strikes and acting as a general mobile base for all UNSC operations, being crucial during the Harvest campaign and the Battle of Arcadia. Though they were never meant to be frontline warships, not going toe-to-toe with Covenant battlecruisers, there were simply too many people and resources on board. These were more to secure the areas after the main fleet had pushed away Covenant forces. And while it did have that titanium A plate armor, even its reinforced hull was nowhere near as resilient as a true UNSC cruiser.
Destroyed.
We get a glimpse of this when the Spirit of Fire collided with a Covenant heavy destroyer. So, large sections of the Phoenix outer hull were sheared away on impact, while the Covenant ship sustained minimal damage. So even though these were militarized, they were best served in logistical and in a fire support capacity. There is a lot more detail and tons of specific history on the Spirit of Fire, but I think it does deserve its own separate video. But for the Phoenix, I think you can understand why it was so crucial to humanity's spread across the galaxy, and how it did become such a perfect fit for the UNSC once the wars kicked off. That's it for the breakdown. If you made it this far, please hit that like button. I really do need your help. But most importantly,
my favorite ship in the UNSC fleet, the Phoenix class, is awesome. Alright. It was by Meta Nerds Lore. And now we're moving on again. So, this is the Charon class complete breakdown, again by Meta Nerds Lore.
All ships fire at will.
Oh, so are these Charon classes? I thought they were Paris classes in Halo 3.
What's up, Meta Nerds? Charon? This complete breakdown is going to pull from every resource available to completely understand the Charon class light frigate.
Charon.
From 2494 to 2526, the United Earth government faced an undeclared civil war against separatist colonists, a widespread rebellion known as the Insurrection. To fight off insurgents across distant worlds,
So it was a Charon class that we see in Halo 3. Stalwart class. I'm kind of interested on this one. These two are very visually similar, I'm noticing, but the Stalwart has a noticeably different profile, especially in this area right here.
UNSC needed versatile warships that could escort fleets and rapidly deploy ground forces into all sorts of hotspots. The Charon-class light frigate would be a new breed of escort ship manufactured by Sino-Viet Heavy Machinery, made originally for the Colonial Military Administration, or CMA, and later for the UNSC Navy. It was explicitly designed for fleet escort duties, planetary defense, and to deliver troops, ideal for counter-insurgency operations. And we know that they entered service by at least 2501, amid the escalating rebel violence. At 490 meters long, it was relatively small by later naval standards. It would end up being one of the smallest UNSC capital ships in service. But it's only 45 meters shorter than the Paris, but is less than half the length of the Halcyon. Its design followed the same general layout as its sister frigates, the Paris-class Heavy Frigate and the other light frigate, the Stalwart, featuring twin forward hull booms and a central keel-mounted magnetic accelerator cannon, which ran along the top boom. This sleek, compact profile made the Charon nimble in both space and through atmospheres, and it's well suited for escort duties to hunt down fast rebel ships. But it does trade raw firepower for extended carrying capacity. Its hull had this enlarged lower hangar bay, making it far better at landing troops on a planet than other frigates of its era. For sublight propulsion, the ship is drawing from the Naoto Technologies V4L deuterium fusion reactor, considered one of the strongest of its time, while the faster-than-light travel was enabled by the Series 4 Shaw Fujikawa Translight engine, humanity's version of a slipspace drive. and this would be crucial for rapid response, allowing the Sharon-class ships to hop between flashpoints as insurrection attacks were ever increasing. And so despite its modest size, it was engineered to carry a large complement of troops and vehicles. Each ship could have up to 782 personnel. We don't get exact numbers on the Marines, but that's crew plus Marines. And it's pretty impressive that that number is 78% of the Halcyon. Those enormous hangar bays, which would remain as one of the largest by volume of any UNSC frigate, could accommodate multiple dropships and armored vehicles, typically setting out with multiple Pelican troop dropships, at least 2 M313 Elephants, tons of M12 Warthogs,
like
at least 3 M808C Scorpion tanks, and numerous AV-14 Hornets. To rapidly deploy elite shock troopers, the frigate's ventral surface was lined with 12 drop pod bays for ODST Helljumper pods, allowing platoons...
What ODST? What ship did they deploy from in ODST? If anyone can tell me that'd be very Poggerinos of you. Thank you.
Of orbital drop shock troopers to be launched directly from space onto a battlefield. And the ship design also had 3 large elevators in the hangar floor, which could lower tanks and Warthogs to the ground or raise Pelicans for launch. They're effectively making sure that the Sharon class can be a spacefaring beachhead for UNSC Marines. When fighting an insurgency, you'd need to have a troop presence on the ground. And so we see every element of its complement aimed at facilitating this. What the Sharon gained in troop capacity, its sacrifices in sheer firepower. It was lightly armed compared to its peers, since it was envisioned for fire support and rapid deployment rather than slugging it out with other capital ships. Its primary weapon was the single Mark II light coil MAC gun, mounted along the forward keel, and this electromagnetic gun could fire heavy ferric shells at incredible speeds, allowing it to punch through all the armor of ships at its time at least. And for secondary armament, they each had M58 Archer missile pods with 10 pods in total, and each of those pods was loaded with 10 guided Archer missiles. Compare that to the newer Paris-class heavy frigate introduced in 25-23 that carried over twice as many missile pods, with 26 in total. And even the Stalwart-class frigate had 16 Archer pods. Everybody has more than the Sharon's 10.
So... the Sharon is basically... Is the Sharon basically the weakest between the Stalwart, Paris, and the Sharon? Or... it did say that it had a decent troop capacity, but...
So it's really not built to win these long-range naval duels on its own. Instead, it's meant to provide localized fire support during troop landings or to finish off damaged targets. And as for repelling incoming enemy fighters or boarding craft, it had 4 M870 Rampart 50mm point defense guns in twin-mounted turrets. 2 turrets were mounted at the top and bottom of each hangar bay structure, giving 360-degree coverage against incoming aircraft or missiles. These rapid-fire guns were really vital for protecting the frigate and any accompanying transports, because the insurgents would often make use of lighter strike craft, and then the Covenant would just flood the area with fighters. And although we keep bringing up how light this is, it does still pack a nuclear option. Each one was equipped with 3 M4093 Hyperion nuclear missile silos, which were recessed in its hull. I do find it funny if you watch my other ship breakdowns that almost all of them mention that they could carry a nuke, and that's when we're talking about ships from the era of the Covenant War, but it seems in this human v human war, it was just let the nukes fly. I know it's probably just funny wording from the sources, but it still made me laugh. But a single Hyperion could destroy a Covenant light cruiser like the Xanar outright. That is, of course, if the aliens' energy shields had been knocked offline. But it's kind of crazy to think about, but it helps people understand just how strong Covenant shields are, and that no, a single nuke does not turn off a Covenant shield. It can absorb multiple hits, which really stresses just how hard this fight was for humanity. Against insurrection-era enemies, a Hyperion strike was often overkill, and you would have to think it had such bad PR for the UNSC that it would really only just breed more insurrectionists. But as the Covenant War began, these nukes gave the Sharon-class frigates a fighting chance to cripple larger enemy vessels. The usual strategy would see the Sharon relying on coordinated tactics, combining its MAC round, salvos of Archer missiles, and maybe even a nuclear strike. With coordination, some time, and honestly some luck, these light frigates were able to take out Covenant craft. Though of course all commanders knew this was not a heavy broadside ship. Its real power was in strategic use, and for occupying areas with its troops. When the Covenant invaded
in that footage, it looked like it blew up before the shields gave out. It's probably just the gameplay.
2525, the ongoing insurrection was suddenly eclipsed by the far greater threat of alien genocide. Many insurrectionists even set aside their grudges to unite against the common enemy. And so these Sharons, originally built to police human rebels...
if memory serves, there was at least one insurrectionist cell that tried to side with the Covenant, and then the Covenant did the Covenant to them. So, you know, not all of the commies were... Not all the commies realized that the genocidal aliens were genuinely genocidal.
Found themselves thrust into the fight for the survival of the human species. Throughout the Human Covenant War, they served in fleet actions and ground engagements, escorting larger UNSC ships, hunting Covenant raiders, and delivering Marine expeditionary forces to contested worlds. Their large hangars proved invaluable for evacuations and...
Hang on, I just noticed something. Hang on. That...
forces to contested worlds. Their large...
He gets hit by a plasma
hangars proved...
All these elites are carrying needlers.
Invaluable for evacuations and counter-invasions. Ferrying troops and armor to liberated cities or burned-out colonies to
I'm never going to be able to unsee that.
But humanity was almost always overwhelmed by the superior tech and sheer numbers of the Covenant. Usually you think an enemy might have more numbers or better tech. The Covenant had both. And so UNSC admirals compensated by deploying frigates in wolf-pack formations, these combined arms battle groups that rove the galaxy.
That's a lot of long
like seen during the Battle of Voi on Earth in November 2552. No less than 7 Sharon-class frigates of Battle Group Victory swarmed the Covenant Forerunner Dreadnought. And in this engagement, which was itself part of the larger Siege of Voi, the Forward Onto Dawn and her sister ships unleashed their MAC guns and missiles at close range in this brave attempt to stop the Prophet of Truth's ship. Although they ultimately couldn't destroy the enormous Dreadnought, the battle shows just how scrappy these things were, always thrown into the fight, absorbing punishment, buying time, and delivering Spartan strike teams, like John 117, right into the heart of the battle. Ironically, one of the very Sharon frigates stolen during the insurrection would also go on to become a quiet hero of the Covenant War. The insurrectionist-held Bellicose, which was formerly the UNSC Bellerophon, would remain under an independent flag.
What kind of name is that, Bellerophon? I'm sorry. That name sounds ridiculous. I'm sorry, but it does. Bellerophon. Or Bellicose. Bellicose sounds a lot more reasonable, but Bellerophon. That's such a weird name to me. I'm sorry. Shout out to anyone in the audience named Bellerophon, I guess.
But its crew would not ignore the alien invasion. In 2526, Captain Castilla even hosted a clandestine meeting aboard Bellicose, uniting all sorts of rebel factions to discuss aiding the UNSC against the Covenant. Later in the war, Bellicose emerged from hiding at the Battle of Cy Serpentis in 2543, just in time to save Admiral Preston Cole's battle group from a Covenant attack. In this turn from the stolen, turned insurrectionist Sharon class, is fighting right there alongside UNSC forces, really stresses just how important this ship was to the survival of our species. It was there from the beginning, from trying to keep the colonies unified, to the defense of Earth and the Ark Portal, even carrying heroes like Master Chief. In the post-war years, the UNSC introduced newer frigate designs, like the Strident class heavy frigate in 25.
The Strident class? What is this thing? It looks like it was made by 343. I'm sorry, it does. 343 343's early designs before we got to Infinite. Well, and Wars 2, Halo Wars 2 is technically them as well, but their UNSC designs were, I'm sorry, they were weird. There's no other way to get around it. 343's designs for ships in it was weird. Okay, it was weird. Just saying it outright.
49, and the Mulsanne class light frigate by 2553.
Now that's more reasonable. Look at that. I mean, it's still a little weird compared to earlier designs. A little more bulbous in some areas, more rounded. But it still has a bit of the Halo identity, you know? The classic identity, you know?
All in this attempt to modernize the fleet. These newer ships, of course, had greater firepower and upgraded tech, and gradually supplanted the aging Sharon class. But its legacy does live on, forever being referenced by military leadership as an excellent example of a balanced blend of transport capacity and fire support.
Playing through this level.
That's it for its breakdown. If you made it this far, please hit that like button. It really does help. And I do need your help.
Alright. So that was the Sharon class. And now we're going on to the Stalwart. Hooray. Which was
Chief, get
also
inside.
visible.
Gear up.
We're taking this fight to the surface.
Alright, so this is the best multi-role frigate, the Stalwart class complete breakdown by Meta Nerds Lore.
Chief, get inside. Gear up.
Hang
We're
on.
taking this fight to the surface.
Is the Stalwart... Was the Amber-clad a Stalwart?
What's up, Meta Nerds? This complete breakdown of the Stalwart class light frigate will pull from every resource available. Please hit that like button if you want to see these types of videos. YouTube is making that more important than ever, but let's get into it. Decades before humanity ever encountered the Covenant, the United Nations Space Command, or UNSC, was already deep into the bitter civil war. The insurrection saw outer colony rebels fielding their own ad hoc fleets, with several dozen outdated frigates and a few hundred corvettes, all being captured and repurposed by insurgents. To secure its far-flung worlds against these threats, hundreds of spacefaring military-grade vessels, the UNSC needed a new class of warship that could both fight in space and deliver troops planetside. And it's out of this political and military urgency that we get the Stalwart class light frigate in the early 26th century. Developed by Sino-Viet Heavy Machinery and...
Oh, so that's the breakdown. I was wondering what was on the sides of it. Huh. That is kind of a cool breakdown. I mean, I don't completely get it, but it's kind of cool.
Entering service in 2515. It was built for planetary defense scenarios.
And I see down here that unlike with the Sharon class, this does not have the same like drop bay. It looks a lot thinner in profile, and I'm guessing this is where the ODSTs must come down from, judging by, you know, drop pod right here.
Capable of screening larger ships in orbital battle, while also ferrying Marines to the surface. It was a compact escort frigate that struck a balance between fleet support and troop deployment, an ideal answer to the insurgents' uprising of this era. Several of the first stalwarts immediately joined Admiral Preston Cole's Third Fleet during the final push of the Harvest campaign, proving their worth in battle years before humanity even knew of an alien threat. Despite its relatively small size,
So, I've noticed that the Human Covenant War, specifically with at Harvest, Captain Cutter said, "But now it's ours again." During the opening cinematic to Halo Wars. So does that mean that the UNSC initially won over Harvest? That's something that I need to... Did they initially win over Harvest at the beginning of the war, and then just lost it again at some point? Like, were there two separate multi-year, or were there two separate large battles for Harvest? I remember that Harvest was the basically the flashpoint of the war. It's war. It's where the fighting really started, so to speak.
Became the backbone of the UNSC Navy when the Human Covenant War erupted in 2525. Measuring only 478 meters and having a mass of 0.93 million.
So it's a bit. It is heavier than the Sharon class, shorter than it though. All right. And I guess the Paris class must be the heavy boy among these three then. Well, respectively speaking.
In tons, it's described as one of the smaller classes of frigates in service. It was the smallest UNSC warship class deployed during the Covenant War, being 12 meters shorter than the Charon and less than half a Halcyon. But the Stalwart's modest scale was by design. It granted the ship agility and speed to be able to evade enemy fire while still carrying all the essentials for planetary assault. Its profile introduced a then novel skeletal hull shape with a two-pronged bow and armored engine pods flanking the stern. A style that is described as later becoming standardized with the Charon class and the Paris class frigates, which might be confusing. I mean, it is confusing, because the sources also say that the Charon entered service more than a decade before the Stalwart. So it's a bit strange that it said that the Stalwart set the precedent that later became standardized. I'll be honest, I'm not sure what to make of this. If you know more about that particular point, please leave a comment.
I guess.
But what is unique is that the Stalwart's upper hull boom housed the fire control systems and reactors for its main gun, while the gun barrel itself ran along the lower hull spar, an inverted layout unique among UNSC frigates. Both the Charon and Paris mount their MAC cannons on the lower hull spar. I'm not sure what to make of this. If you know more about that particular point, please leave a comment. But what is unique is that the Stalwart's upper hull boom housed the fire control systems and reactors for its main gun, while the gun barrel itself ran along the lower hull spar, an inverted layout unique among UNSC frigates. Both the Charon and Paris mount their MAC cannons on the upper spine, but the Stalwart's designers put it on the bottom. It's said that this maximized space for the command deck up top, but the overall design was guided by the needs of the insurrection-era battlefield. The UNSC wanted a fast, maneuverable frigate that could escort bigger vessels, defend colonies, and swiftly insert ground forces to quell rebel hotspots. And though it is the smallest of the frigate trio, it still does have a well-rounded arsenal, with its primary weapon being the 56A2D4 Light Magnetic Accelerator Cannon, or MAC, which for the enemies it was going up against, just a single MAC slug usually crippled or outright destroyed enemy warships. Until the Covenant show up, of course. When it came to the alien shielding tech, multiple frigates often had to team up, concentrating volleys of MAC fire. During the desperate defense of Earth in October 2552, there are at least 67 Stalwart-class frigates swarming into action as part of Admiral Harper's Fifth Fleet. Many of these frigates were lost in battle, but together they succeeded in stripping the shields off a Covenant assault carrier, which opened it up for the kill shot. And so that engagement really does show this class's role perfectly. Multiple nimble frigates coordinating their MAC strikes, so that while any Covenant ship might be stronger than any UNSC ship, they'll be tied up with one capital ship, while dozens of smaller frigates are bombarding it. Backing up the MAC, it had an array of secondary weapons to handle all sorts of targets. Along its flanks were 16 M58 Archer missile pods, each loaded with salvos of guided missiles for ship-to-ship combat. For longer range anti-fighter and anti-missile defense, it was equipped with 76 M340A4 Streak missile pods, capable of saturating space with so-called micro-missiles in order to thin out swarms of enemy strike craft. But maybe most impressive is the extensive point defense grid, having a network of automated cannons with 6 M870 Rampart point defense guns and 52 M710 Bulwark guns, spread out over just about every surface. This gave each frigate a cloud of close-in firepower, in order to shoot down incoming plasma projectiles, boarding craft, and fighters.
You could shoot
For
down
comparison,
plasma
its sister, the Karen-class frigate, traded some of that defensive weaponry for more troop capacity, but the Stalwart emphasizes self-protection and fleet air defense. And this difference meant that the Stalwart was better at holding the line against Covenant attack craft, whereas the Karen was optimized to carry additional dropships and vehicles for invasion. And of course, it was built in an era where human warships lack energy shields, but it is described as being remarkably effective and resilient in combat.
I wonder,
with a hull that was clad in...
I wonder if, because Halo Reach's ending cinematic, where Halsey is monologuing, and you see your helmet just in that, like, grassy field. I wonder if that, and that's dated to, like, 2580 something. I wonder if by then, actual, like, Covenant-style, shields are actually more common on UNSC ships. Do they actually touch on any of that lore, like, of that period? Like, because that's a long time later. So, any lore nerds, feel free to message me about that, if you know. Or, bump me a link towards, any videos that are like that go over that period. I would actually really like to know about that.
Titanium A armor plating. We get the detail that it's a moderate thickness due to the frigate's light weight, but we're not really sure what moderate means here. It could just be the standard 2 meters or 6 feet of armor. It's just on a smaller ship, and maybe it's not over every surface. Maybe that's why it's lighter. But nonetheless, it's the same type of armor as you see on much larger vessels like the Halcyon or Marathon. While twin OKB Karman 56K fusion drives give it excellent thrust to mass ratio, powering its rapid acceleration and enabling these evasive maneuvers. And several battle reports praise this class for being extremely mobile, built for high G turns and quick repositioning in battle. For FTL travel, it uses a Series 4 Code-In slipspace drive or a Starworks FTL 290C, which was a next-gen Shaw Fujikawa engine for its time, ensuring that these could deploy across...
They didn't play the footage for once when they mentioned Shaw Fujikawa. Every time up to now, whenever they mentioned that, they'd play the exact same footage.
Ensuring that these could rapidly deploy across human space, often needing to rush from one colony to another, playing whack-a-mole with these rebels all across the stars. And it's why it's...
Forerunner Ship World. Was this where, was this, Forerunner Ship World? Is this where the, Halo 3? Not Halo 3, Halo Wars, after Arcadia? Is this where you end up?
It's even more impressive that it's described as being very reliable. UNSC crews really never had an issue with things breaking down. While its internal layout really shows this multi-mission role, with each frigate carrying a standard...
UNSC crews never had a problem with things breaking down. Having served in a military capacity myself, I can say that is highly unrealistic. The shit always breaks down. That's... I mean, maybe they've figured it out in this timeline, but anything mechanized in the military, it breaks down all the time. Like, that shit breaks down constantly. So, kudos to the UNSC. They figured out how to make shit not break down. That's probably the biggest accomplishment I've heard in any of these videos so far.
Crew of about 250 naval personnel. That's just to run the ship, and it could embark around 200 Marine infantry, and a Special Forces company of 64 orbital drop shock troopers, or ODSTs. Having all these troops on board effectively meant that the Stalwart doubled as a transport and assault ship, ready to insert forces into a hot zone. And for deploying those troops, it had 6 small hangar modules, 3 per side at the middle of the ship, and each hangar was essentially a one-ship bay that could launch or recover a single dropship at a time. far more restricted than the Charon, which has these spaces to release multiple Pelicans at once. But just because it was harder to release them doesn't mean it was really lacking much. It carried 6 D-77 Pelican dropships, but also at the same time a few D-96 Albatross heavy landers, which were for cargo and vehicles. Like the Charon class, it has this elevator to drop things down and release them, though like I said, it's a smaller elevator. And then along with the aircraft, it also has a dozen Warthog light vehicles and 6 M808 Scorpion tanks, all supporting those Marines that were released planetside. For the ODST shock troopers, it had a dedicated drop pod deployment system and a ventral coil gun launcher that could fire 24 single-man HEV drop pods, setting those out in rapid succession. But with 64 ODSTs on board and only 24 pods, not all could deploy in one wave, and so the rest likely served as backup units or would hop on the dropships. This magnetic launch tube hurled the armored pods out of the belly of the ship at high speeds, allowing ODSTs to make their trademark Helljumper orbital insertions, landing directly into the battle zone. All of these capabilities taken together, the strong armaments, troop capacity, and deployment systems, all allowed it to serve a crucial role in the UNSC. And when the Covenant War erupted, these frigates suddenly found themselves facing an alien enemy far more powerful than the insurrectionists they were built to fight. But nevertheless, these tough little ships served with distinction throughout this war, and as it raged on, they became some of the most prominent frontline vessels. They escorted convoys, defended orbital defense platforms, and delivered vital reinforcements to besieged worlds.
What the hell is that?
And the UNSC rapidly expanded their production, seen on February 9th, 2557, when a batch of 16 new Stalwart-class frigates rolled off the assembly lines at Sinoviet's orbital shipyard above Reach. The yard likely assembled multiple hulls in parallel to replenish wartime losses. But the brutal reality of this war meant that most of those ships would not survive long. Within 2 years, 15 of the 16 sister frigates from that Reach batch had been destroyed in action. That's a 6% survival rate. Many fell during doomed last stands, like during the Siege of Paris IV and the Fall of Orcadia, where outnumbered UNSC fleets fought to buy time for evacuations. The lone survivor of that group was the UNSC in Amber Clad, hull number FFG-142, which went on to become one of the most famous Stalwart-class ships. By 2550, later Commander Miranda Keyes took command of In Amber Clad, and the frigate was assigned to Earth's defense fleet. There it was present for the massive Covenant assault in October 2552, and during the initial battle above Earth, In Amber Clad and her fellow frigates threw themselves into the fight alongside the larger UNSC cruisers and carriers. The stalwarts proved their worth in the defense of the orbital MAC gun platforms. Their point defense guns and archers helped thin out waves of Covenant boarding craft, though, like always, the casualties were high. When the Covenant flagship Solemn Penance, carrying the Prophet of Regret, broke through and descended toward New Mombasa, In Amber Clad pursued it into atmosphere. Commander Keyes deployed her Marine complement in support of Spartan 117 on the ground, using the frigate to land troops directly into the city's combat zone. And after a frantic battle on this African coast, the alien carrier made an unexpected slip-space jump in atmosphere. But In Amber Clad didn't hesitate. Keyes took the frigate through the portal after Regret's ship, and the jump brought In Amber Clad, and by extension Master Chief and his strike team, to Installation 05, Delta Halo, which was a monumental discovery for humanity. The frigate entered low orbit over the ring and once again offloaded John 117, dozens of Marines, and a contingent of ODSTs to stop the Prophet from activating the Halo. Throughout the Battle of Installation 05, In Amber Clad provided fire support and mobility to the UNSC forces on the surface, harassing Covenant ground operations on the ring, and moving units where they were needed. But this would be the ship's final campaign. The parasitic flood was unleashed on Delta Halo, and they managed to infect and capture this frigate while it was in standby over the installation. Under flood control, the ship executed a slip-space jump directly into Covenant Holy City, High Charity, and so this frigate was effectively destroyed from inside out. Her remaining crew were assimilated by the flood. In Amber Clad herself was left derelict inside High Charity as the city descended into chaos. A truly tragic ending to one of the most renowned Stalwart-class frigates. not a glorious death in combat, but being an unwilling puppet of the Flood. Though you can look at it this way, this was crucial in ultimately destroying the Covenant. It did take out their capital, and as the war concluded in 2552, the UNSC Navy was shattered, but many Stalwart-class frigates did survive to see victory, and were kept on and even remained in frontline service during the post-war era. The UNSC Meriwether Lewis was active as late as 2558, serving as a temporary base for Spartan operations. Spartan Edward Buck's team was stationed on it before he transferred to the new Infinity. In the peace that followed, the Stalwart class found a continued purpose as patrol ships and rapid response
pickets.
Speaking
of Buck, actually, what happened with Buck between... I've looked at a summary of Halo 5, and I know that Buck was on Fireteam Osiris. What happened between 5 and Infinite? Like, where's Buck right now? Or is that answered in, like, a book or something? I know that Buck and Romeo, Buck, Romeo, and Mickey went on to become Spartan 4s, and if I'm not mistaken, Mickey, 343 had, for some dumb reason, joined the insurrection for, literally no reason, as far as I'm able to tell. And what, the rookie who we played as got his head ventilated or something by some insurrection bitch after the war. Well, whatever. Let's keep it going.
Guarding human colonies from residual Covenant splinter factions, and even renewed insurrectionist threats. In many ways, their original role came full circle. Once again, these frigates were policing the frontiers, keeping the peace in far-off colonies just as they were meant to do in the 2510s, as if the whole Covenant War never even happened. So that's it for its breakdown. If you made it this far, please hit that like button, comment any corrections, things you'd like to add, and suggestions for future videos.
It's pretty cool.
But most important of all, remember, once the alien war is over, we can get back to fighting with each other. And may the domain preserve you.
Alright, that was the Stalwart class by Meniner's Lore. I just felt like I was about to sneeze, and then I didn't sneeze. That was so awful. I hate that feeling so much. Alright. Now, we're moving on to the Paris class. When the UNSC finally snapped, Paris class complete breakdown by Meta-Nerd's Lore.
Frigate 318 Heavy is inbound, and MAC rounds have been authorized.
MAC rounds in atmosphere.
One way to get their attention. Hang on to your teeth, people.
What's up, Meta-Nerds? This complete breakdown of the Paris class will pull from every resource available. I'm sure you've heard, but if you can, please hit that like button. It seems like YouTube is making likes more important than ever. And be sure to check out the store that is linked under the videos. There's a ton of cool stuff, you'll just have fun window shopping. And if you want to pick up something that is my shop, so it all helps to keep this channel alive. But let's get into it. The Paris-class heavy frigate was conceived during the insurrection in the Outer Colonies, which was well before the Covenant arrived in
It seems that most of the ships were conceived during this period.
2525. So in the decades leading up to First Contact, the UNSC was in an undeclared civil war against secessionist rebels that were collectively referred to as insurrectionists. These insurgents frequently resorted to guerrilla warfare and even open space combat, capturing UNSC ships and eventually leading to full...
Were there any, were there any ships that the UNSC designed after, during the Human Covenant War, after the insurrection? Or was it basically everything that got designed either before the Human Covenant War or after it? Genuine question here, because from what we've seen so far, it seems like every ship has been designed before it. except for the Autumn class so far, which was designed after it. So, genuine question here.
On ship-to-ship battles. There was a great disparity between the strength of different rebel cells, because some amassed entire fleets of stolen or secretly built warships. And facing this escalating threat, the UNSC realized it just needed more firepower. The Paris-class heavy frigate was born from that need, designed and introduced in 2523 as a direct response to the human insurrectionists. So it came out only 2 years before we met the Covenant. The Paris-class was not built to fight aliens, but to fight other humans. It has some of the oldest of humanity's intuitions about goddesses of war and wisdom. There is this timeless human struggle that we hate war, but it does strengthen our species overall. And the timing here couldn't be more perfect, as our civil war in space prepped our species for the coming war with aliens. When we finally were invaded by the Covenant, we already had battle-hardened leadership and vessels that had been tested for decades. And despite sharing the general layout of earlier UNSC frigates, it was a significant step up in size and firepower. It followed the same basic design lineages as its predecessors, the Charon class and Stalwart class light frigates, with the characteristic twin forward hull booms, these long rectangular sections that stick out towards the front. The upper boom housed the ship's primary weapon, a 65 P8V1 magnetic accelerator cannon, or MAC, which ran basically along the entirety of the frigate's spine. The whole ship was built around this main gun, which is a common trait for UNSC warship design. Their joke is that they're just like the UNSC rifles. So they're bullpup ships, trying to get as long a barrel as possible into each platform, be it the rifles or the ships. At around 535 meters long, it was a decent bit longer than the Charon. At 490 meters...
Actually, hang on a second. I want to see the breakdown of that rifle again. So, assuming this is all cheek pad, that is, I very much would like to understand how this functions, because, this, getting a better look at this after all this time, how the bullets get from here up to here, where the, or unless the chamber is still back here, in which case that is a very small amount of room for the bolt. Unless the bolt is like some telescoping bolt or something. Because unless that's the case, that is a very, very small amount of room for the,
be it the rifles or the ships. At around 535 meters long, it was a decent bit longer than the Charon. At 490 meters, and Stalwart at 478
that didn't
meters.
Make much sense.
This extra length allowed engineers to install additional magnetic accelerated coils for the MAC. When you look at how this thing works, each of those coils is amplifying the energy, and so simply having more does boost the projectile's velocity and thus overall firepower. So though it is hard to notice when we see it being used, the Paris's main gun does hit harder than the MACs on lighter frigates, all part of this clear design philosophy that they just needed a ship that packed the biggest punch possible, which really shows the increased concern over how many military-grade ships the insurgents got their hands on. And to that end, the Paris-class heavy frigate carries a far heavier armament than the other frigates. 26 M58 Archer missile pods arrayed all across its hull, more than double the missile batteries on the Charon, which only had 10 pods. These ship-to-ship Archer missiles were relatively effective against the unshielded hulls of rebel ships, or Covenant vessels once their shields were stripped away. Firing them before the shield was down was kinda useless. They were easily absorbed and even shot down by the Covenant's point defense lasers. For close defense, the hull is covered in 12 M870 Rampart point defense guns, which is triple the number of automated turrets on the lighter frigates like the Charon. And this dense network of roof-mounted cannons could fill space with overlapping fields of fire, shredding incoming fighters, boarding craft, or missiles before they could reach the Paris or its allies. And then we have the 12 Harpoon nuclear missile silos, which were set into the central hull. This gave the Paris a potent option to eliminate hardened targets, but like mentioned in the last video, it's not like a single nuke could take down a Covenant shield.
Arm the nuclear warhead. Proximity detonator at 100 meters. Fire! Three, two.
And the ship is still up.
Power us back up. Slowly.
Sensors coming back on. All longsword interceptors vaporized. Covenant ship? Intact, sir.
No.
It is moving off though, sir. Most likely to make repairs.
For comparison, the other frigates only carried around a few nukes, and that 12 is 4 times what we get on the Charon class. But with all this power on offense, there are some trade-offs. Most of its internal volume is dedicated to reactors, ammunition, and structural reinforcements for those weapons, which left little room for cargo or troop capacity. Unlike the Charon class, which could carry hundreds of troops, vehicles, and dropships for sustained planetary assaults and recapture, the Paris had a minimal hangar bay and very limited ground deployment capacity. It could launch a few GA-TL-1 longsword fighters or some shuttles, but could not transport large armies or vehicle columns the way a Charon or even Stalwart could. Its air wing and marine complement were comparatively small, around 600 personnel in total with crew and passengers. The designers were deliberately sacrificing troop capacity and atmospheric capability, really wanting to dominate in space combat. Heavily laden with armor and armaments, Paris wasn't as nimble in atmosphere or suited for landing operations, but in the vacuum of space, it really did strike terror into the enemy, even being able to hold its own pitched battle, rather than like we saw with the Charon and Stalwart, which are supposed to act more like support vessels. The Paris-class frigates were often deployed in groups, also called wolf packs, which we did see with the other frigates, but these were far more effective. Multiple heavy frigates coordinating to overwhelm a single target with Mac rounds and missiles from all sorts of angles. To give them credit, the Charon worked out a lot of the kinks here, a great proof of concept, as the wolf packs were excellent in their counter-insurgency role, hunting down pirate corsairs or rebel destroyers, and so now when you're doing this with a more powerful ship, Paris wolf packs were effective even against Covenant tech. 3 of them in an arrowhead formation could volley their Mac guns together for a concentrated punch, kind of like what the Marathon was going for, while a larger defensive line of 4 of them in the so-called shield formation created an overlapping gauntlet of point defense, which made it nearly impossible for any strike craft to get past them. In this way, it does blur the line between traditional frigate and destroyer, as it had the aggressive mindset and firepower of a small destroyer, but in this slightly more compact and cost-effective package, which of course was intentional. The UNSC wanted a ship that could be built in large numbers and plugged into many roles, as escorts for capital ships, as picket hunters eliminating enemy raiders, or stepping up to be the spearhead of an attack in the absence of larger ships. The Paris could fulfill all these roles well. You just needed enough of them. And again, you do see the desperation here. More insurgent uprisings means let's just make a ship that was fast and powerful and quick to make. Send them out as soon as they roll off the assembly line, and destroy the rebel fleets outright before they can get it in their head that they might have a proper organized navy. When the Human Covenant War erupted, the Paris-class commanders were shook by this alien shielding.
Energy shields. That's amazing.
Bring the ship around and arm the Mac.
In the devastating firepower that even the smallest Covenant ships packed. But once they got their footing, they did prove to be ferociously effective especially on a ton-for-ton basis, always punching up. UNSC High Command ramped up production, and it would end up being one of, if not the most constructed UNSC ship types by the war's end. They fought in virtually every major engagement of the war. One of the very first Covenant skirmishes at Coyote in 2525 involved the UNSC Commonwealth, which was on its mission to deploy Spartans. Now, the Commonwealth did take heavy damage in that encounter, but as would be the theme for this ship, they usually did hold on long enough to at least make a difference, at least allowing other UNSC assets to finish the fight. Dozens of them were seen during the Fall of Reach, in the Epsilon Eridani system and its colonies, and earlier in that campaign, the UNSC Grafton famously provided devastating fire support to UNSC Army troopers at Zerdik Ridge, using its MAC guns to obliterate a Covenant ground emplacement. The Grafton was later destroyed by a Covenant supercarrier, but only after delivering these critical blows to the enemy, managing to destroy the invasion forces' uplink tower shortly before being taken out, while the UNSC Savannah played a pivotal role in Operation Uppercut, sacrificing itself to take down that same Covenant supercarrier by detonating a makeshift slipspace bomb. So all these examples show how the Paris-class frigates were used aggressively in battle, often being the first in and the last out, buying time for everyone else, even in the face of overwhelming odds. And so with these three frigates, you do say they struck a great balance. Karens are for moving assets, for making sure you have boots on the ground, that you can hold off some attack or retake some location, and actually hold on to it, not just as a point on the map, but with real people manning some facility there. The Stalwart fits this middle role. Maybe you don't need as many planet-side forces, and the Paris is pure strength, the best for ship-to-ship warfare.
The Paris is a lot
That's
of
it
gun.
for its breakdown. Again, if you can, please hit that like button. Tiny things like that really do help keep channels alive. And check out the shop linked right under the video. There's tons of cool stuff there. I'm sure you'll like something. But most important of all, remember, sometimes all you really need is more firepower. And may the domain preserve you.
I thought he was gonna say all you really need is more gun. Man. Alright, so next we have the... Alright, anyway, so that was when the UNSC finally snapped the Paris-class complete breakdown. Alright, cool. Alright.
What's up, man?
Alright, we are now on the Diligence class complete breakdown by Meta Nerds Lore.
What's up, Meta Nerds? This complete breakdown is going to pull from every resource available. If you like me doing these types of videos, please just hit that like button. YouTube is making the like button more important than ever. And check out the store linked under the video. That is my store. Everything you buy there helps to keep this channel going. Well, let's get into it. By the mid-25th century, there had been bubbling tensions of civil war for nearly 100 years. And the United Earth government faced a growing insurrection, a series of colonial rebellions that would soon escalate into open conflict. And so in response to this, the Colonial Military Administration, or CMA, sought new warships to project their power and keep order on the fringes of human space. The Diligence-class light destroyer emerged from this era, entering service with the CMA Navy in 2433, around 90 years before the Covenant would arrive. It's something a lot of people don't think about, but this really was nearly a century of bubbling tension, with a lot of the same issues that were faced by the British Empire around 7 centuries earlier. People don't like being ruled by forces that have nothing in common with them, with the colonies spread across the Milky Way being increasingly independent, but still tied to politicians that were out of touch and way off on Earth. Built by Sino-Viet machinery, these ships were intended as multi-role colonial combatants and peacekeepers. At a length of 550 meters, they were less than half the length of the later cruisers like the Halcyon, which was 1,170 meters long. But it was a decent amount longer than the frigate trio of Charon, Stalwarts, and Paris that all stayed around 500 meters. But the thing is that at the time of its debut, almost 100 years before those ships, the size and capability of the Diligence earned it the initial classification as a cruiser. It was big for the time. Think about like on Earth, today the largest battlecruiser is the Kirov class at 252 meters, So that's less than half the Diligence. It's all relative. But at the time the Diligence was introduced, it was an enormous deal. And of course, the political climate into which it was born shaped its design and purpose. Colonial insurgents were typically armed with stolen freighters and modified civilian craft, so the CMA needed warships that could outgun and outlast these threats across enormous distances. The CMA might have had more assets, but they never knew when or where the insurgents would strike, so they could overwhelm any particular point, at least for a time. And so the new Diligence would patrol restless systems and rapidly respond to uprisings, like during the Callisto incident of 2494. In the rebellions that came after this, these light destroyers were deployed to hunt down those insurgent ships. But to show how powerful these rebels were, one major revolt in the Eridanus system was only stopped after 4 of these light destroyers were destroyed.
I find
Again,
it interesting
it's all relative.
That,
the weaker insurrectionist vessels were magnitudes more powerful than anything we have today. And so even this next-gen ship could be taken out. 4 of them were taken out here by what might be described as ragtag militias, but they're working with nearly the same level of technology and firepower. Its hull was sheathed in titanium A armor, the standard military-grade plating of this era, and what we will later see throughout the entire UNSC. And although it might not have done much to stop the later Covenant weaponry, for the enemy it was intended to fight, it was great at stopping solid projectiles, the ballistic weapons that were likely to be wielded by rebels. It was propelled by twin fusion drives and equipped with a Shaw Fujikawa slipspace engine, allowing it to rapidly deploy across space, trying to get to those rebellious colonies ASAP. And so it was light destroyer or colonial cruiser, escorting larger vessels, enforcing blockades, and delivering orbital fire support during counterinsurgency ops. Every Diligence had orbital drop shock troopers, or ODSTs, and drop pod bays. Now, to really show its age though, the Diligence class was designed before the introduction of the Ship-Mounted Magnetic Accelerator Cannon, or MAC, this weapon that became iconic to the human forces. Human warships of the 2430s and 2480s did not have this firepower that became ubiquitous throughout the later 26th century ships, which meant the Diligence relied on high-velocity coil guns and missiles to do its fighting. So the coil guns might be similar to the MAC technology, but that doesn't mean they are MACs. Its primary weapon was a Mark 33 Spitfire naval autocannon, a colossal mass driver turret serving as the ship's big gun. And this was backed up by an array of smaller weapons, 6 M60 Sentry autocannons, 40 M35 Ares missile launchers, and 10 M710 Bulwark point defense guns, used to take out enemy fighters or incoming projectiles, or, very importantly, to stop any rebels from boarding them, because that's absolutely what the insurgents were trying to do. That's how they were able to snowball their fleets, using a few small ships to catch a bigger one, using that to catch an even bigger one. Getting their hands on this latest light destroyer would have been one of the best things you can get your hands on. So it's incredibly important you have the point defense weapons right. And then with the other autocannons and missiles, it was usually more than enough to take out any lightly armored targets. And against civilian uprisings or pirate fleets, they didn't have energy shields, of course, and they rarely had heavy armor. So although often it was easy to take them out, but like mentioned before, and like we'll see more in a bit, the sheer scale of this conflict meant that many of the Diligence class were also taken out. And by the UNSC's more modern standards, of course this 100-year-old ship was substantially underarmed. The once cruiser-rated Diligence had to be reclassified as a destroyer to reflect its lower armament and tonnage relative to the new capital ships, like the Halcyon cruiser of the 2520s that masses out at 11 million tons, and of course has a MAC, whereas the Diligence was only 2.2 million tons and had no MAC. And this is what led to one of the most interesting refits that I've ever seen. As the insurgent threat intensified, major upgrades were made to this ship in 2496. They began to be refitted with 2 outrigger MAC guns, one mounted on each side of its main hull. This, of course, dramatically boosted the ship's striking power, going from no MAC to 2 MACs. And it's kind of funny to think about, but with these simple additions, it packs more of a punch than much later ships that were designed around a single MAC cannon. These additions gave the destroyer a really unique silhouette, and it's seen in ships like the UNSC Winged Hussar, which if you've never seen them, they are incredible. These are the elite Polish heavy cavalry from around the 1600s. 3 years after this refit, the UNSC introduced the Hillsborough-class heavy destroyer in 2499, a newer design with heavier armament that would utterly outclass the unmodified Diligence. But with this refit program, it really does blur the lines. It's simple, but other ships go through so much work trying to have this 1-2 punch effect, trying to have 2 MAC rounds hit just a split second after each other. So I really think this is really not appreciated, that these 2 MACs could be fired at the same time from a single ship. There had to be all kinds of incredible uses for this. But this happened so late. By this time, the CMA's influence was waning due to corruption and military failures, leading to the UNSC Navy to take a more direct role in colonial security, a shift that really was accelerated by the fallout from the Callisto incident. Many Diligence-class ships were transferred fully under UNSC Navy command, right around the time that the insurrection is hitting its peak. By this time, they were firmly considered a light destroyer in classification, and under UNSC leadership, the hope was that humanity could soon have peace. And then the Covenant arrived. By 2525, the Diligence class had actually been retired for over a decade, with newer destroyers like the Halberd class and their new, larger cruisers doing most of the heavy lifting. So the aging Diligence class ships were largely mothballed or relegated to auxiliary fleets. But with the outbreak of the Covenant War, this forced humanity to use every asset they had. They were again hastily refitted for combat against a nagging foe, upgrading their weapons, sensors, and systems wherever possible, and pressed into battle alongside much newer ships. But even newer ships had no chance against the Covenant's warships, which were both more numerous and just more superior at every technical level. A Covenant heavy destroyer measured over 1.6 kilometers long and had a mass of 115 million tons, armed with plasma beams, pulse lasers, and shields. And so against enemies like this, the 550-meter human destroyer with no shields and weaker weapons really had to rely on expert tactics, teamwork, and sheer luck. Captain Jacob Keyes once said that Covenant destroyers could turn UNSC ships into Swiss cheese, but humanity had grit and ingenuity. The refits with twin MAC guns were able to crack energy shields quickly, and some commanders realized that they were lighter and faster than many fully modern destroyers, and one of their most famous uses was in 2544 with the UNSC Kronstadt, which carried out a covert insertion of special forces onto a Covenant-occupied planet, releasing teams of ODSTs and a Spartan II via drop pods to the surface of Heian, in their mission to assassinate a Covenant prophet. And this really showed a niche where the Diligence could still be useful, being smaller, a little bit quicker, and having all the assets.
Okay, so I did see this Halo Legends episode, and I was actually really annoyed by it. For one main reason above all else. ODSTs are supposed to be the most elite special forces that humanity had ever produced, right, aside from the Spartans, right? And as soon as it gets to the point where they're about to snipe the prophet, like they got their crow's nest and all that, they're about to do the job, the ODSTs just stop doing any kind of site security. Basic infantry level thing. Like, that isn't something that guys on their level should be doing. Like, even if it's a case of, oh, there's a Spartan here, we don't really like Spartans. These guys were... They did not do ODSTs any justice with how they performed during this mission. Like, they were... No, they... It's very annoying.
Assets you need to slip into a hot zone, insert and extract assets right under the enemy's nose. And sadly, it's more expendable. It had less crew, and just cost the UNSC far less. And obviously cost the UNSC far less than a newly made ship. Just whatever went into maintaining it and the refits. By the end of the Covenant War in 2552, any surviving Diligence-class ships were truly antiques among the fleet. serving across 3 distinct eras.
Yeah.
First as the CMA's colonial enforcers, then with those upgunned refits at the peak of the insurrection, and then as these last resort warships against the most dangerous enemy humanity had ever seen. And it's really impressive just how useful it was in each of those very different eras. Fighting for over 120 years. That's it for its breakdown. If you made it this far, please hit that like button. I really do need your help. Check out the shop. I'm sure you'll find something you like.
That was pretty good.
But most important...
And that was the Diligent class.
What's up, man?
Alright, this is the Anlance class, hybrid frigate? Human Covenant hybrid frigate. By the description, it sounds like this thing was probably a post-war creation?
What's up, Meta Nerds? This complete breakdown of the Endless class frigate will pull from every resource available, and please hit that like button, it's more important than ever. But let's get into it. The end of the Human Covenant War in 2552 left humanity's fleets decimated and in urgent need of modernization. When the Covenant Empire shattered into splinter factions, the UNSC faced new security challenges in this post-war era. And so the UNSC Navy embarked on a massive rebuilding program to replace combat losses and counter all the lingering Covenant warlords in all sorts of outer colonies. Hundreds of new warships were laid down at Mars and Tribute, including the Endless-class light frigate, and it represents a radical departure from earlier UNSC.
This thing looks weird. You can tell this was made in the era of Halo 4 and 5. It looks really, really weird.
UNSC ships in both its form and function, being the smallest frigate in current service at 372 meters long, which is far smaller than the older UNSC frigates like the Charon at 490 meters, or Paris class at 535 meters.
It doesn't look like
it's only
UNSC
marginally
ship.
Longer than the largest UNSC corvettes, like the Lancer class, which is 341 meters.
Like it looks,
and so it really is a
like
proper light frigate designation. But
it looks like it more belongs in like a High Republic design from Star Wars, or how would you? I don't know how to describe it. It doesn't look like a UNSC.
It has
ship.
a novel design, and it's highly efficient, featuring a lifting body hull with advanced maneuvering thrusters, making it perform extremely well in atmospheric flight and planetary landings. This aerodynamic hull is a stark contrast to the bulkier, flying brick design of most UNSC ships, and there was a notable improvement during ground operations and low-orbit insertions. And everything was built to be modular and versatile. It can be outfitted with mission-specific modular racks, like reconnaissance configurations with enhanced sensor suites, while a disruptor or electronic warfare loadout would see it equipped to jam enemy communications and sensors. And this is a shift from the single-purpose combat orientation of older frigates, like the Paris being the big gun, or the other multi-role vessels, which were kind of always trying to do it all. And there's just newer capabilities here. With that electronic warfare module, it can mask other UNSC ship movements or scramble enemy comms across a wide area, to the point that just a pair of these frigates working in tandem can project a jamming blanket over an entire planet, severing communications for any forces below. While it also has high-definition sensors, which can pinpoint any object larger than a warthog within a 10 light-minute radius. That's 112 million miles. Almost like being on Earth and detecting a warthog on Mars. This is probably the most important feature here, because we are hunting down the Covenant remnant, tracking down secret bases, vehicles, and other assets that might be hidden on a planet. And I say that's the most important, even though it has a dramatically different weapon system. Unlike the older frigates, which had a MAC and banks of Archer missiles, This ship has no Mac and no missile pods at all.
Huh?
Instead, its designers equipped it with a suite of laser-based weapons powered by the ship's fusion reactor, meaning that it had virtually unlimited ammunition during prolonged engagements. At the center here is a turreted Helos Capital-class high-energy laser, a powerful beam cannon mounted where a Mac would sit on older ships. The Helos laser fulfills the role of the Mac by delivering sustained heavy fire and without the need to reload ordnance, and does reflect a broader growing trend of energy weapon deployment on UNSC warships. We also saw this with the Mulsanne-class frigate, which preceded this, being introduced in 2553, being the first to mount a bright lace laser instead of a Mac, paving the way for the unlaced laser arsenal. In addition to the Helios, it carried 4 Magna 320 pulse laser turrets and a network of 8 AN-SEQ-11 point defense laser arrays, all basically for defense, making sure nothing got too close, swatting down incoming fighters or missiles with these precision beams, much like how Covenant ships used pulse laser turrets for point defense during the war. And all of this really was the dream of many UNSC commanders who saw how Covenant warships could fire plasma and laser weaponry continuously without running out of ammo. Weapon design was catching up with ship fuel design. With the human weaponry, it's as if there was a lag. We weren't used to the near-endless energy of fusion reactors, still relying on projectile-based things that require totally separate ammunition stocks for each of the different weapon types. This is, of course, a much more streamlined system. One thing powers the entire ship, from its thrusters to its guns. And again, this all ties back to its main design purpose of hunting down Covenant remnant forces. To consider it a win, these forces just have to survive the fight. And with other ships, it might mean they just run out of ammunition. It's far more likely that you would run out of Mac rounds, that you would run out of power for the ship reactor. Though it should be pointed out that these aren't as powerful as the later Macs that we get. It's not as quick as the one-shot potential of some of the heavy coil Macs. But the trade-off was more than acceptable. It was quick enough, with the sustained energy dump from these weapons, quickly draining shields and then slicing through the enemy ship. Now, it is interesting that it has such a relatively light mass at 0.9 million tons, as since we're working with this laser technology, we're getting closer to the Covenant tech, and so you might expect it to have a much heavier mass, like how almost all Covenant ships weigh more than their UNSC counterparts. Obviously they're longer, but even when you adjust it for the same size, they weigh more per kilometer. And it's due to all the reactors, the energy requirements for their shields and weapons. And it said,
I feel like just how that's set up, a lot of it has got to be like material density or something. Like the materials that they use to make Covenant ships have to be just objectively heavier than what's used for UNSC ships.
That the Unless has more space since it doesn't have that 103-meter gun barrel through its spine, which would be typical for a frigate-sized Mac, and it's instead allocating this to reactors, emitters, and other support systems. But you would think it would have a larger reactor.
It's still so ugly.
Now, from the moment these came off the assembly line, these frigates were thrown right into the action trying to secure a post-war peace. In 2555, they proved invaluable in tracking both former Covenant vessels, but also human insurgent fleets, which had simply picked up their fight after the alien forces were destroyed.
Of course.
Remember, there was nearly a century of bubbling tensions, which led to the insurgent era, decades and decades of fighting before the aliens even arrived. With the Covenant gone, in a lot of areas we're seeing the insurgency rise again, but now these forces were being hit with Covenant-based weapons. Their UNSC overlords were more powerful than ever. With those electronic warfare suites, they were finding hidden pirate bases everywhere, even cloaked Covenant raiders, and then they could even actively disrupt enemy coordination before a strike. And often the Endless would work in tandem with other heavier UNSC ships, acting like a forward scout in this counter-intelligence measure, and if this thing was hitting you, draining your shields, and Macs were flying, it was often a pretty short fight. In 2557, the Navy would launch its new flagship, the UNSC Infinity. It was so large that it could carry up to...
Wait, so the Infinity only went into service in 57? Didn't Halo 4 take place in 58? So the Infinity was only active for, what, a year or less before the events of Halo 4? Kind of neat.
10 frigates internally in special sub-vessel bays, effectively acting like a mobile base for these frigates. Infinity's commander, Captain Thomas Lasky, often kept a complement of Enlace and Strident-class frigates aboard to serve as rapid response escorts or recon craft. In October 2558, during Operation Kamchatka, which were the opening maneuvers during this conflict with Jul 'Mdama's Covenant, the Infinity would deploy these frigates as escorts, seen flanking the massive supercarrier and providing support as Spartan forces engaged Covenant troops on the surface. And then they see combat during the fight with Cortana's Created, when she seized control of Earth's defenses in late 2558. And during Operation Wolf in 2559, at least 2 of these frigates were tasked with electronic warfare operations near the quarantined planet Reach. These 2 ships positioned themselves above Reach and projected a colossal jamming field that encompassed the entire planet, preventing Cortana's Created forces or any other enemy from being able to communicate off-world. A lot of things can blow stuff up, but this is a really unique ability of this frigate. And we later hear more of them being used to secure colony shipping lanes, deterring piracy and insurrectionist smugglers, even using their superior sensors to scan craft to find illicit material. Then we have Project Arc Dream, which was sent to investigate a derelict, ancient human starship drifting in deep space. The frigate's small size and precise navigation controls allowed it to safely approach and dock with this mysterious craft, delivering a research team. And this does show the adaptability of this.
That wasn't the event that saw a Spartan 4 get infected by the Flood, was it? Feel bad for whoever that was.
This vessel. One week it might be fighting off Covenant splinter fleets, the next it might be shuttling around a research team, one that was studying the remains of an ancient human ship over 100,000 years old, from the time of a previous galactic purge of the Flood. It's kind of cool that a ship like this, that is an example of human tenacity and adaptability, recognizing areas to adapt the enemy's technology, it's in that vessel that this research team would find an ancient human starship. That's it for the breakdown. If you made it this far, please hit that like button. It really does.
The Onlance, perhaps the ugliest human ship, but still a good breakdown. Thank you, Meta Nerds.
What's up?
All right. We'll do one more, and then I'll call it a stream. So this is stop insurrectionists with this one simple trick. The Hillsborough class heavy destroyer by Meta Nerds lore.
What's up, Meta Nerds? This complete breakdown will pull from every resource available. Please hit that like.
Is this the Hillsborough? It kind of looks like the... Well, kind of does and kind of doesn't. But it kind of looks like the, kind of looks like the trio, but without the large engines on the sides.
Like button. YouTube is making it more important than ever. It really helps the channel. And check out my shop linked right underneath the video. You'll have fun just window browsing, but if you do pick up something, it helps to keep this channel going. But with that, let's get into it. The Hillsborough class heavy destroyer emerges in the late insurrection era, which, like I covered in the Diligence video, really you could look at this as a century of bubbling tensions. By the late 2490s, many outer colonies were rebelling against Earth, straining the colonial military authority. And after flashpoints like the Callisto incident and the Erotinus uprisings, the CMA feared the collapse of centralized Earth-based rule. To counter the escalating insurgent fleets and ever more fortified rebel strongholds, the CMA decided it needed a true heavy destroyer, something far more imposing than the light destroyers and the frigates of the UNSC. And with this, we get the Hillsborough class in 2499, right at the peak of the insurrection. It's named after its lead ship, CMA Hillsborough, which you're seeing in that name there is the UNSC had not fully taken over yet. It has CMA in the name, and it was intended as a show of force. It could patrol these restless colonies, deter any lurking insurrectionists, and escort other vessels through dangerous frontiers. Though it can get a bit confusing because when the Diligence came out, it was considered a cruiser at 550 meters. It was enormous for its time, and so while the Hillsborough is only 526 meters long and has a mass of 2 million tons, it was the largest human warship besides the true capital ships, with capital ships being the cruisers and carriers. So it outsizes all the frigates and other destroyers, older CMA creations.
Yeah, so that's right. It does remind me of the Paris Stalwart and Charon, just without the. Well, it's mostly up here in the front, but you notice that these have an open space between the booms, and the Hillsborough doesn't.
But again, it's confusing because things like the Diligence would be basically demoted, no longer considered capital ships once the larger cruisers and carriers came out decades later. It does have this blocky, angular silhouette that became symbolic of the CMA designs, and of course this overall aesthetic would be continued into future UNSC ships, and features those dual hull sections which would appear in the trio of frigates Charon, Stalwart, and Paris, but without those kind of side wing structures. And so visually it has a cruiser-like profile, and like just about all the other ships we've looked at, it has 2 meters of titanium A armor plating. It's 6 feet thick titanium sheets, which were modular and very easy to replace. But some of the older ships had about 1.5 meter thick armor, a bit less, and it's showing this increase in the firepower of their enemy, these various insurrectionist factions. For propulsion, we don't have a named fusion reactor, but of course for the slipspace drive it has the Shaw Fujikawa Translate engine. But the main show here is the weaponry. The Diligence did not have a Mac. It was built before humanity even had this technology, but now the Hillsborough has at its core a spinal-mounted magnetic accelerator cannon, the 83 B6R1 Mac, giving it an unprecedented long-range punch capable of shattering basically all human-made warships with a single strike. To show a bit of a rivalry between these different military groups, the UNSC's own destroyers were still catching up in Mac tech. The Navy's first heavy destroyer, the Able class, exemplified by the UNSC Gorgon, only carried what is described as a rudimentary Mac, with only 3 rounds on board. But the Hillsborough was the first built around a full-sized Mac, with ample onboard ordnance to keep it fed, meaning it could deliver sustained Mac blows in a fight, outclassing everything else from the CMA and their UNSC counterparts, at least until they caught up. But imagine just how important this advancement was. If a single Mac shot can take out any other ship, and now you have enough rounds on board, a single Hillsborough could take out entire insurgent fleets. But this is also why it needed a complement of secondary weapons, outfitted with 4 M60 Sentry autocannons for close to medium-range targets, with these dual-barreled 50mm cannons, similar to many of the UNSC's point defense guns, which could tear apart smaller craft like Rebel fighters or incoming missiles. And they had 56 M48 Ares missiles, which were ship-to-ship guided weapons.
So, 48 Ares missiles. The Archer is M52, I think. So does that mean that the Archer succeeded the Ares? Or are they different purposes?
Comparable to the UNSC's Archer missile pods, but deployed in greater numbers, emphasizing the damage of a single volley. And for a sort of last line of defense, they had 7 M870 Rampart point defense guns, rapid-fire cannons positioned all around the hull. And so all of this was meant so that it could strike far out like a giant sniper rifle in the size of a destroyer, one shot, one kill with the Mac gun, but having autocannons and missiles for medium-sized craft that get too close, or for spreading out damage over a wide area when you're going after targets planet-side, and then the point defense guns taking out any incoming missiles, bomber runs, or boarding craft, as the insurrectionists would love to add a Hillsborough to their fleet. And as soon as this thing enters service in the CMA Navy in 2499, it quickly became a recognized sight in troubled colonial sectors. For decades, it patrolled the outer colonies as flagships of CMA task forces, often scaring away insurrectionists simply by showing up in orbit. And again, bragging points here with the fact that these rebels had hijacked UNSC destroyers, and the CMA-created Hillsborough could take them all out. But as this unrest dragged on for decades, eventually the UNSC takes over and becomes the military force extending the will of the United Earth Government, trying to keep all the colonies under the centralized rule of the United Earth Government. And of course, for as powerful as this thing was, everything changed when humanity met the Covenant.
Yep.
In October 2525,
everything fell
the
short
CMA
of
Heracles,
Covenant tech.
the Hillsborough class that led Battle Group
Nothing
4
really,
into the Epsilon Indy system to investigate why the colony Harvest had gone silent. Captain Marabou Veretti's battle group had the Hercules and two smaller CMA frigates, the Arabia and Vostok, and together they represented what the CMA thought was a thoroughly powerful reconnaissance force.
Nothing that the UNSC
Upon arrival,
had during
they
the
found
war
Harvest
was, really
completely devastated. The planet's surface charred into a glassy wasteland, and orbiting this ruin was a single alien warship, a Covenant vessel later identified as a Rhasis pattern interdictor, a type of medium cruiser, and its name was Heaven's Brilliant Beer. The Heracles attempted to communicate with it, but the Covenant ship answered, "Your destruction is the will of the gods, and we are their instrument," and immediately opened fire. The exchange that followed was brutally one-sided and over in mere seconds. 14 seconds after the shooting started, both escort frigates Arabia and Vostok had been annihilated, and the Heracles itself was severely damaged, its hull vaporized, and with its systems failing, the heavy destroyer mustered enough power to flee the system and limped back to Reach, taking several weeks, but they were able to report on this alien threat. This first encounter proved a harsh lesson that even their most powerful heavy destroyer was no match for a single Covenant capital ship. All of the Covenant warships had energy shields, plasma weapons, and greater range. They even just had greater numbers. And so just like the Hillsborough was proud that it could take out enemy vessels before they could even touch it, that was true for the Covenant ships. Even the mighty Hillsborough could be taken out at a great distance and absorb multiple MAC hits. And this Covenant war would last another 3 decades. Many of these designs were at least 20 to 30 years old and increasingly more expensive to maintain. But the UNSC still needed as many vessels as it could, though all considered it prioritized newer warships and mass production of frigates and the newer destroyers, letting these older ships essentially just keep fighting until they fell apart. They could at the very least report a Covenant presence, engage them long enough for backup to arrive, and so they were often left in safer sectors. Though some were just scrapped outright, having their materials recycled in order to build newer ships, as there were some key components that could just be moved over. By 2547, the Colonial Military Authority as an organization was completely dissolved into the UNSC. And this is when we see the Hillsborough essentially vanishing from service, though they did most likely continue to be used in the same way, at least as mobile sentries. But this would be one of the most dramatic falls of any ship, going from the futuristic tech that just struck sheer terror into anything it came across. The cutting edge.
I suppose that makes sense, given I don't think we see a Hillsborough in any of the games.
With the Mac technology, one-shotting everyone at a distance without any concern of ever being damaged, to essentially being ignored, forgotten, and passed up by the ships that it inspired. That's it for its breakdown. Again, if you can please hit that like button, it really does help me out. Check out the store.
Alright. That was the Hillsborough class heavy destroyer. What? There we go. Alright, thank you everyone for coming to the stream. I appreciate you all showing up, and I hope you'll join me on Thursday when I stream. Well, you already know it. I will be streaming Campaign Evolved, perhaps even a couple hours early. I'm probably just gonna start streaming it as soon as I have it finished downloaded. So hopefully you're looking forward to that, and I hope you'll join me then. Until next time. Well, until then, it's ciao, sayonara, see you later, and bye-bye.